Make a motion to, I need a motion to approve the agenda, please.
Dr. Short, second. This is all in favor? Thank you.
Who seconded it? Thank you.
The next section is awards, recognitions, and commendations. And so, because of the current health situation, we don't have our children and all of our staff come in for recognitions or recognitions or commendations. But we do want to make sure that we recognize Gemini donation to the Prince Edward County High School. We are pleased to announce that Gemini has again donated $10,000 to the Prince Edward County High School Career and Technical Center for those programs that are centered on industrial arts. This will make the third consecutive year that Gemini has granted funds to the PECHS CTE programs. Past donations have focused on the electronics and robotics programs, and this year the funds will go to help support the drafting program headed by Mr. Bruce Bogeese, by Mr. Bruce Bogeese. Prince Edward County High School is beyond thankful for the support Gemini continues to show to us and to the students of Prince Edward County Public Schools, allowing them to engage and explore exciting new opportunities and possible career pathways. So again, we want to publicly thank Gemini for their very generous donation. We'd also like to acknowledge the Virtual Virginia partnership with Prince Edward County High School. Prince Edward County Public Schools high school students taking Biology 2/Ecology with Virtual Virginia received a live in-person lesson. This was a project that Ms. Llewellyn, Virtual Virginia science teacher, collaborated with the PCPS science teacher, Ms. Frobel, to organize a watershed adventure sponsored by a grant provided by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. Dubbed the Beautiful Earth Steward Team, students traveled to the Sandy River Reservoir where they met with their Virtual Virginia teacher and a representative from the James River Association. Students spent the morning learning about runoff from storm drains. They saw firsthand the detriment of plastic pollution collecting along the riverbank, minimal levels of dissolved oxygen in the water system, and evidence of invasive species. Diligently, students worked to clean pollution from Sandy River Reservoir and collected macroinvertebrates to determine the health of the waterways. So this was a wonderful adventure for our students. It's an example of using the Profile of a Virginia Graduate, which focuses on the 5C approach, including critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, and citizenship skills, all of which will prepare every student with the content knowledge they need and skills to succeed after graduation. So we are very excited about that partnership, and we hope to continue that partnership with Virtual Virginia. Yes, sir.
How many students were in that?
I'm thinking about the picture. I want to say about 10 or 15. I want to say it is highlighted on our webpage.
We have one more presentation, VSBA Academy Awards, School Board Members and Superintendent. It is important for the school board to recognize excellence in leadership and achievement for all employees. It is equally important to recognize the accomplishments of individual school board members and superintendent for its participation in VSBA meetings and other academy sessions and VSBA governance and service activities. So today I'd like to award these certificates to the school board members. All right, Award of Achievement, Dr. Timothy Corbett. It was Laura Stiff, make sure she gets that, and Lucy Carson. Thank you. The Award of Excellence, Dr. James Dumminger.
Thank you.
Dr. Barbara Johnson, and Ms. Beulah Womack. The Award of Honor, Dr. Peter Gurr. And the Award of Recognition, Mr. Douglas Farley.
I have a question.
We want to thank our school board members for participating in VSBA Academy and workshops that are sponsored by VSBA, and the recognition of participating in those things. We'll move on to consent agenda. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second? Mr. Farley? All right, any questions? All in favor? We go to number 11, action items.
We are bringing back a second read of EFB. Mr. Davis presented this at the last school board meeting around free and reduced price food services. And what is the recommendation of the subcommittee? Dr. Corbett, Mr. Farley, and Mr. Lyon.
I didn't see any changes, any necessary changes. Good.
So is your recommendation to approve?
I didn't speak with the other members on the board. No.
Are we wrong?
Are we for committee members?
I move that we approve.
Okay, motion to approve it,
Second.
second? Okay. All right, all in favor of approval? All right.
That's fine. I'm peeking out the
She's
door
right
to
here.
see if Miss Virginia
She's
Jones
right
is
here.
there. There you are, Miss Jones. Thank you. Ms. Jones is here to discuss and ask for approval for an appropriation. Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Good afternoon, Mrs. Carson, School Board Chair, board members, and Dr. Johnson. This evening, I come before you seeking approval for the school board to request from the Board of Supervisors to appropriate additional federal funds in the amount of $127,536.62 to the school operating budget for this school year, the FY 21-22 year. This amount represents the school improvement grants for the elementary school in the amount of $52,629.27 and $74,907.35 for the middle school. These additional federal funds will be placed into the school operating budget for a new total of $28,494,300.51. No local match is required for this appropriation. Are there any questions?
Dr. Corbett?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the appropriation.
Second.
Okay. All right. Any questions? All right, all in favor?
Thank you all.
Ms. Jones, could you let Ms. McClure know that we're good?
Yes, I will.
Move on to number 12, non-action items.
Number 12, has to do with the coronavirus state and local recovery funds to support HVAC replacement and improvement projects. And we do have a presentation for you. It's not showing on this machine. Let me just go ahead and do this one first. And this is just another ESSER package that we're discussing, that we will be discussing.
I think he's got a clicker for you.
Do you want it? Yeah. It's up to you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Dr. Johnson, and members of the school board. What I have before you tonight is permission to apply for the coronavirus state and local recovery funds to support HVAC replacement and improvement projects. This is in addition to the ESSER 3 funds that we applied for in September. I'm not going to read that to you. What this means for Prince Edward is that we will get an award of $374,787 for HVAC renovations. There is a 100% local match required to receive the funds. However, we can use our capital improvement plan funds, or we can use any of the CARES grant funds for this local match. We did write money over this amount in ESSER 2 and in ESSER 3. So those funds are already there and they are in those grants. So it won't be any money that needs to come out of local money. Are there any questions?
So,
I just wanted to make sure I'm clear. We have the funds to match the grant.
Yes, ma'am. And they are in the ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 grants. That money was written into both of those applications.
And this will be used for HVAC replacement projects.
Yes, ma'am.
How many HVAC would we be able to replace?
I do not know that amount. I would have to get a quote from, Mr. Wilkerson would have to get a quote.
So it's another
yes, and
step.
so that moves us from so that's $374,000 times 2.
Times 2.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
how much that we would actually have. So if we have until 2024.
We have until 2024 to encumber the funds, and we have until 2026 to ask for reimbursement.
So this could be, and I'm asking, but stating all at the same time, this
Sure.
could be funds for HVAC, because we don't need HVAC throughout the division everywhere. I mean, we just ended up with new HVAC at the middle school. So it could be used for the high school, but it also could be used for the elementary school. If we were to get a new elementary school, this would cover portions of the HVAC system, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Porter?
How long do we have?
Until 2026.
We have till 2026 to ask for reimbursement. We
Right,
must
right.
encumber the funds by 2024, December 31st of 2024.
Does that mean that we have to actually commit it to?
No, we do not have to submit and ask for
Committed?
We need to commit the money, yes, sir,
To
by 2024.
2024 to, say, an elementary school, and we're trying to get that elementary school up and running.
Realizing that it's very specific to HVAC.
Okay.
So
Right.
it means one or two things, and hopefully there will be decisions made long before then, soon, I hope. But if we decided, for instance, if the decision was to have a new elementary school, then this approximately $600,000 could help with the HVAC system in a new building.
Okay.
Or in addition to, depending on how much things cost, we could replace some of the HVAC at the high school I don't think we really need any at the middle school at this point. We still have warranty on HVAC in middle school.
I guess as we're looking at this, are we looking at whether removing the $374,000 from the other cares funding?
It's already there, yes.
Yeah, but if that's something that we wouldn't use that for any other reason though, is that we are removed, this would be.
Can I speak to that?
Anything else that we would designate that money?
We already have that money allocated for that purpose anyway in the grant.
For HVAC?
Yes, sir.
You already-
It was already written in there, well over that amount, yes, sir.
Because we could only use ESSER money for certain things that have to do very specifically with health, air quality, sanitation, contactless supports, that type of thing, so.
So it's this one.
But it was not designated necessarily for the elementary school, it's just designated to improve air quality.
Yep. Any other questions?
Any other questions from board members?
So this doubles our money,
Yes, ma'am.
we have permission so far.
Yeah, okay. All right. Need a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we apply for, this year.
It's just information, but
Yeah,
we
it
have to
was
approve
just
it.
information, but
I thought we
you
had
did
to.
ask for permission, so
Yes,
for the
ma'am.
sake of asking for permission, if we can get permission, just, or support from the board to do that.
Made a motion.
All right. Mr. Farmer. Second.
Well, Dr. Governor seconded it first.
Okay. All right, I didn't say it. I'm sorry.
Just kind of quiet, please.
You be quiet. Okay. All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the list, information items, academic discussion, intersection.
Yes, so if you recall, we were talking about intercession, and the last time we met, I said intercession is, October, I want to say 5th through the 11th. but that
11th
feels
through
like too many
15th.
days. 11th through,
15th of October.
thank you, there were too many days there. So we did in fact have intercession, and Dr. Stitz Johnson at this time would like to talk to you about intercession, the numbers of students participating, et cetera. So, Dr. Stitz Johnson.
Good evening, Madam Chair, school board members, and Dr. Johnson. I'm standing before you today to present our very first intercession in Prince Edward County Public Schools. So we all know that intercession was a brief break in our academic schedule to address some of the learning loss, as well as provide intervention and enrichment activities for our students. It was strategically planned at the end of a grading cycle, rather than delaying these experiences to the summer. So we're hoping to catch these students before the end of the school year. So the purpose of intercession is, again, to address the learning loss through skills remediation, accelerate learning through STEM enrichment, and provide opportunities for our high school students to obtain credit recovery hours for graduation. I provided for you in your packet a timeline for the planning of intercession, so you can kind of see how intercession transcended all the way through its inception. So the topic of intercession was first introduced in our calendar committee that was held back in February of 2021, February 17th. The calendar committee was tasked by Dr. Johnson to come up with an idea for how the division was going to address learning loss. And once we, as a committee, met on several occasions and devised, we actually proposed 3 calendars. We selected option 2, and the board approved it on April 14th. And then we met in July during our summer months to meet with the administrative team during our administrative retreat to present intercession and the logistical side of it, how it would operate and function during that week. And then we also had an intercession planning committee, which was comprised of representatives from each school, along with administrators. These were assistant principals who were designees as intercession coordinators. And we basically came up with what our intercession would actually look like. And so we started sending out letters and invitations to families to actually target specific students to participate in intercession, much like you would do for summer school. Intercession applications and flyers were posted on social media, all platforms. Paper copies were distributed at schools, daycare centers locally here, so that our parents were aware of intercession. So intercession actually occurred during the week of October 11th through the 15th. And at the conclusion of intercession, we launched surveys to both our parents and our teachers. So this is what the breakdown of intercession looked like as far as invitations that went out versus the number of students who actually registered for intercession. And then you will see in other slides how many students actually attended. So in the elementary school, there was 330 invitations that were sent out. We had 279 participants. 230 went out at the middle school. We had 134 participants. And at the high school, of course, it's a little different. There were some invitations sent out for content-specific students, but also 43 invitations went out for credit recovery. And so we actually had at the high school 48 students to participate, and 4 of those students were postgraduates. And so those were our students with disabilities. So our total student invitations that we actually sent out was 716. Of those 716, we actually have 461 students to participate, which represents about 24% of our student population. And I put that number down at the bottom for you too. On this next slide, I actually broke down intercession into 2 groups. So it's kind of like students who attended regularly, 2 or more days. And I've also broken it out by student groups based on ethnicity. So if you read the chart, you see it broken out by pre-K all the way down to our postgraduate students. So that's our pre-K through 13 students going all the way across with the ethnic groups. And then on the far right are 3 shaded columns. I broke out the data so you can see how many of our students with disabilities attended, our gifted students, and our ESL students. So those student numbers actually repopulate in the other categories to the left. That's why I separated it out so that you would see, so they wouldn't be duplicates. Okay? So what it looks like is, again, 426 students actually attended 2 or more days of intercession. And of those 426, if you read the chart, 83 of these students were students with disabilities, 5 of these students were gifted, and 10 of them were ESL. Okay? And then in the next slide, I broke it down by students who only attended 1 day. And I did the same category separation so that you can see by ethnicity and grade level of how many students actually attended just 1 day of intercession in that 5-day week. And so if you see at the bottom of that chart where it says division totals, you see the breakdown per number of ethnic groups, or go straight across and see how many students per grade level attended 1 day. And then the last section were students who were invited, said they were coming, but did not show. And you can see that we have, for grade level totals, we have about 40 students who did not show for intercession. However, the students that did attend intercession, they were involved in hands-on activities throughout the week. And we were able to walk over throughout the week and observe some of the activities that were captured. We took a lot of pictures. We took a whole lot of pictures. But for today's presentation, I captured some of those photos here so you can see some of the hands-on activities, STEM-related activities that the students actually performed during intercession. They had a great time in doing it. They made animals based on adaptations. They made oobleck, slime. They dissected owl pellets. They did a variety of things during intercession. I was also tasked with assigning a pre and post test for our students who attended, but I just want you to keep in mind that our high school students did not participate in pre and post because, again, they were high school students who were receiving credit recovery, but they also had some field trips that they participated in. So they may not have been there for both the pre and post test assessment, so I did not have any comparative data for them. So this chart actually shows you the pre and post test assessment per grade span in K-8 in the post-test so you can kind of see what the growth lies. But here again, bear in mind, not everybody attended every single day. So they may have taken a pre-test, they may not have taken a post-test, or some of them may have attended 1 or 2 days and just weren't there. But this is what we captured from our performance matters data from the pre and post-test assessment. So as you can see, everybody's in agreement except for third grade was kind of stagnant, no growth there, and then our middle school dropped. And then the surveys were launched. So of the 79 instructional staff members that taught during Intersection, we received 65 responses back. And I captured the overall comments and feedback that our teachers actually stated in regards to Intercession. So some said they had an enjoyable week. They did request more guidance in planning STEM lessons for students for the March Intercession. They felt that the pre and post assessment did not actually measure where students learn. They also preferred that we try to group our students based on academic needs, enrichment, and or remediation. So what they would like to see is half a day. If we do Intercession again, what they would like to see is if students who need remediation stay in remediation all day and then offer enrichment all day for the students who would like to be enriched. The problem with that is we just don't have the staff to be able to do that with the shortages and the number of staff who are needed for Intercession. So we're still trying to figure out what's the best way to work that out. Also, they would like for us to enforce student attendance. The problem with that, again, is we're going above and beyond the normal hours of what is required for students to attend. So students are actually attending Intercession. This is 10 extra days of the academic calendar, just like summer school. Summer school is not mandatory. We can't enforce it, but we can highly recommend summer school for attendance. Because, again, summer school is outside of students' normal amount of time they're required to attend school. So then we launched the survey for parents. So look at the number here. 461 students participated, but we only received 39 responses from parents. And the responses were kind of mixed. Some say they loved it. Some believe that it gave their students a mental break. They loved the activities because it helped their students learn in different ways, mostly because the students were with a different teacher who had a different method of explaining a task. They would like for communication to be sent out in regards to what's going to be taught during Intercession week. They felt that the assessments were a waste of instructional time, and they did not like that their student was placed with a different teacher because they felt that the teacher did not know they felt that the teacher did not know their child. So this was feedback from the parent. And then the last piece of the parent survey that I captured is their likelihood to send their student back in March. And so, as you can see, it was kind of mixed here as well, sort of split. 13 said that they were likely to send their student back, 8 were undecided, 14 were unlikely, and 4 parents did not respond. So what did I do with this survey? I came up with some suggestions for our March Intercession, just based on the feedback. And the first bullet is to use performance-based assessments to actually measure our students' performance, or what our students actually know, versus a traditional paper and pencil or traditional multiple choice test. So giving our students performance tasks and assessing them with a rubric instead of doing the traditional multiple choice. Because we feel that this is much in line to our balanced assessment plan that we're implementing here in the division. And it just works seamlessly for us to incorporate that measure of knowledge for our students. And then in the invitation letter, since parents requested that the remediation skills they would like to know, we will list those remediation skills and topics to be covered during Intercession week. So whatever the theme is, whatever the unit is, we will list that out in the invitation letter. And then work with our ITISs, which is our Innovation and Instructional Technology Specialists, to create a sign-up sheet to support the teachers with their STEM activities so that they can better plan their enrichment lessons. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I think the recommendation at the end was very good.
Thanks.
But I do agree that since they were in for remediation because of COVID, and then post-tested to make sure that students' needs were met. So I do agree with the teacher said too, but I think that since the first time out, I like your recommendations and be looking for some, better results next time. And I also think that, I also feel that there should have been a attendance requirement because of COVID. The students should not be sent to school one day and then miss all the rest of the time because it's a disadvantage for the student. And while it's not summer school, this isn't meant to be summer school or replace summer school, I don't think, but to deal with the students' academic achievements. That's what I think. So I think that parents should be, when they fill the forms out, have to understand that the kids be there for full time. That's what I think. Because if they're not sure about that, they will keep them home, send them one day, keep them home, send them 2 days, keep them home. Kids are not getting advantage by that. They really aren't. They're not going by that. That's what I feel. It doesn't meet their needs.
Yes.
So for the pre-test and the post-test data, for the math, it looks like the first grader, the sixth grader, and the seventh grader improved a lot. So how did you do it?
So,
You see, for first grade, it's from 5% improved to 57%. The sixth grade is from 6% to 65. Seventh is from 7% to 62%. That's increased a lot. So how did the teacher do?
so they did a lot of remediation during this week. They did a lot of use a lot of manipulatives to capture the learning in math. So students were doing more of the learning versus the teacher standing and delivering. So it was a lot of hands-on activities for the students. So that pre-test, again, in the beginning, some of the concepts students had struggled with during this 9-week period were presented. Teachers remediated on those skills, provided them other opportunities for growth and learning through manipulatives and other hands-on projects, and then the post-test. And so, yes, those students who took the pre and post-test did do well in math, absolutely.
Dr. Ford?
Did, what, as you went in, did you have some goals that you were trying to achieve?
As far as academic,
Yeah, what would be, what are you looking at as success? When you were, if this was gonna be, if you were trying to achieve something, what was your goal that you were actually trying to, how would you say that this was a good program, a successful program? That this is something that we really want to continue to do because, what would be, did y'all have any criteria like that?
so the pre-test was actually made from the growth assessment data. So we used the growth assessment data, and Dr. Wallace is going to present that to you after me in regards to our data from growth assessments. So they used those skills to remediate. So that was our goal, is to remediate those skills that the students assessed on in the fall, in September, to actually improve our practices on those skills to make better. How do we measure the success of the Intercession program? I would say the pre and post test would be our measure of success, and in addition to that, or in conjunction with that, would be our parent and teacher surveys to tell us, how successful, what areas of improvement are needed, and how do we move forward. We do know we have one coming up in March, so that is why I launched the survey to get their feedback and use that data to drive the decisions for March so that we can make those improvements that were suggested. When I made these suggestions at this end of this presentation, this was all based on feedback from parents and or teachers to improve the practices. A lot of it was basically the communication piece, and not communication from the division level, but more so communication from the school level. So that entails that we as a division needs to assist our schools with planning of intersection. And one of the communication pieces were the topics, because parents want to know, how can I help my child at home when intersection is over, pretty much. So that's why the topics of what we're covering during intersection will be sent out.
So I would like to see a little more specific, like, we recognize that these students are having some difficulty, that, and as when they go into the intercession, this is what the problems are, and then after the intercession, this is what we get, this is what we got.
We have that. Dr. Stiff Johnson has a database with all of the students who participated, as well as the needs of those students, their attendance, etc. So we can continue to monitor those students throughout the year to see how well they're doing. Realize this is just 5 days.
Right.
So with this 5 days, we expect improvement, but it's not just about the 5 days. We have to monitor them along the way, and she has that database. It's not something that we can necessarily present publicly, but we have it. And all of the schools, of course, have the information about who attended, who didn't, so that we can monitor them and their growth throughout the year.
And those students who didn't attend intercession, we're hoping to capture them in after-school tutoring. So the administration are picking those students up who did not attend or perhaps even attended intercession to stay after school and to get additional skills, because we realize that we've lost a lot, especially in the area of reading, and our math has regressed. So we got to remediate those skills that our students did not capture during our pandemic year. So that is the reason why we came up with the idea of intercession, to try to catch those students before we get to summer, because summer is, the school year is gone. You know, we're trying to catch them now.
So do you think that you achieved what you set out to achieve?
It's a process. I definitely don't see we're there 100%, but I feel like we're gaining momentum. Intercession was well received from parents and students alike. Our students even responded saying they wanted school to be more like this every single day. So we challenge our schools. How can you make your school instruction look more like intercession every single day? So we've already put that challenge out to our school administrators to ensure that our students are getting these hands-on experiences, these STEM experiences outside of intercession period, but every day during instruction.
And I would say that it was a success. It was a new idea to capture students. Clearly, some students did better as a result of it. More than likely, it was because of the hands-on activities that they experienced that they don't always get to experience during class. Even though only 25% of our population came, they did come, and that's a start. I think the biggest challenge with intercession is attendance. And so I don't know if that was your comment or.
Instructional attendance as well, right?
Just attendance, period, during intercession. That children do need to be there.
But I mean staff, was it hard to get staff?
Oh, no, staff is fine. That was, because we started this process so early, we talked about intercession, the staff went into intercession. We took notes of who would be there as part of their contract. So we built that in, so I'm not worried about the staff. It's the student attendance that, because it was inconsistent for some children, it's harder to measure the impact. Because this is just, as Dr. Stiff Johnson noted, this is just one strategy that we put in place. We do still have tutoring throughout the school day. We have PALS tutoring, so we do have other things that we're working on. But I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges, and for March, I believe March, when we do it again, I don't know how we are going to revamp it so that everyone understands the importance of daily attendance.
I have one more question. How did credit recovery occur? How did they get the credit recover? How did they recover that?
They have to earn so many hours of tutoring to count towards that. Is it 16
It counts towards their recovering
to
credit?
their,
well, it doesn't count towards the credit, it counts towards, so students who need to recover a credit at the high school level, if they did not pass their SOL assessment, there's a required number of hours that those students must attend remediation. And that comes in the form, sometimes they're in after-school tutoring, the intercession counted towards those hours. Now, honestly, we had some students, high school students, that took great opportunity with that. And we had some students that did not continue the whole week, as Dr. Sith Johnson has indicated. So they didn't actually get to recover a credit during intercession. What they got to do was count those hours of remediation towards what is required by the state before they can retake their SOL test.
And that, the students are very clear on that, they know what they need.
Oh, yes, sir, they know from, yes, sir.
Yeah, the high school students actually, pretty much, they came. Those students pretty much
The
came.
ones that
Yes,
enrolled,
the ones who need the credits, they came,
that needed the credit.
yeah.
To give a slight context, it is 12 hours, and it is required in order for them to take another attempt of the SOL. You cannot just test them again without a remediation program in place first. So it is, in order for them to take another attempt, they have to have those 12 hours.
It was a great opportunity for those students.
I just want to congratulate you on the intercession idea. But I do agree with the teachers. If they're available to meet their kids that when they already have in the classroom, or the kids that need remediation, if they're available, they should be assigned to those teachers. Because the teachers know them, and they know their deficits. I know when I used to teach in school, I had second grade, and first grade, and third grade. If I knew my kids at the next grade level, I knew what they should be. And I knew what they should know. So I think it does help a lot. The other thing I'd like to see, next time to see engaging projects from middle school and high school. We have elementary school most of the time. I'd like to see how those high school kids and how the middle school kids engage and wonder why activities like this. I'd like to see what they do is different, if they try to meet their goals.
I'm sorry, just
Yeah,
to your
no,
point.
not just the elementary school kids. I know how the middle kids are very good with them, but high school or middle school kids also have activities that they can engage in to help them meet their goals and criteria, in
Yes.
terms of remediation. I'd like to see that mix.
I'd just like to speak to being placed with their teachers. It's going to be very, very difficult to do that because the way we wrote it up in order to make this happen, staff could work either the fall intercession or the spring intercession. And so a child's teacher may not have worked at all during that fall intercession. They may have, they may not have. So it can be a consideration when placing children, if your teacher's there to place you with your teacher. But that is, it cannot be a guarantee to parents because realistically, it really may not happen.
But I would think, first of all, maybe the teachers were available to do that.
Oh, absolutely.
Since they made
Everything.
the recommendation,
Mhm.
I'm one that can attest to that, and I can recognize that for what it is.
Mhm.
So if the teachers are willing to be there for that, then perhaps they can engage and see whether they're not going to be there for the 5 days for the students. And then, well, maybe since you're in the process of just trying this thing out,
Right.
you can also add some other activities to other activities to it. See what you need for the next program. That's one thing.
One thing, Dr. Johnson, thank you for the presentation. I'll call you in just a minute, Ms. Skip, hold on. I just wanted to, this is the first time we've ever done this. How did you feel it went? Seriously, not the numbers thing? I know you said the children enjoyed, I know they enjoy the hand-on and manipulative thing. What was the big thing that struck you from the first time we've done the intercession?
So for me, this is not my first time doing intercession. I
Okay,
came from a
but
year-round school, so I have something to compare it to.
Okay.
I felt as though it was great. I went in the first day, and I went in on the last day to look at the level of instruction, the level of student engagement, the excitement for teachers in teaching in this manner. I thought it was a great success. And I was really pleased with what I saw. I took a lot of pictures. I talked to some students in regards to some things that they were doing. Some of the kids were actually researching and doing travel maps across the Virginia regions, where they were using computers and they were typing up a travel brochure. And that was at the middle school level. High school students were taking solvents and trying to figure out and take the colors from the solvent and see which one dissolved. So it was a lot of engagement. I thought it was successful. I just, like I said, hope it transcends to the other weeks of school when kids are actually engaged in the learning and not just paper pencil tasks.
That's the kind of activity I'd like to see. When you're taking pictures of the kids, what they're actually engaging with instead of middle school, high school. Because that's important too. Elementary school, of course, that's going to be counted on, but sometimes the other schools will do that too. Those things you observed in middle school, high school, I wish you take the pictures, and maybe do it next time, but.
So these are all levels on this slide.
But they don't look like.
These are all levels.
To describe the maps and all that.
Yeah,
You know, I'd like to see that,
yeah,
you know, a higher order thinking skill.
yeah.
But I think that would be really great, but I do congratulate you on the intercession. I hope we do it again, not, and maybe in a couple of months or something like that. But I think it's a great idea. I love the idea.
It's scheduled again in March.
I love it, yes.
March, right before we get into, I believe it's right before spring break and testing.
This is wonderful.
So at that time, would the intercession, as far as the students who are coming, be a little more focused on
They should be getting ready for SOL testing.
SOLs?
Mhm.
That's what I was coming with.
Yes.
Still based
At
on
the-
their
Still,
needs.
but based on their needs.
Yes, right.
Yes,
and
the
more.
efficiency.
Okay.
We need that efficiency there.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I'm sorry. I wasn't-
Do you think that there was any loss division-wide because of, or gain division-wide due to the intersection?
Academic gains? What?
Yeah, lost learning or gain
I don't
or
think-
gain, or how do you think it impacted the whole division?
I'm gonna be very candid, I think it's twofold. I don't think we lost anything. I think the pictures and the information that Dr. Stiff Johnson presented is an indication that we gained overall. And that was our goal with Intercession. Some of the things that we did not anticipate was the level of fatigue that this year has caused our staff and students across the board. So I think for those who came to Intercession, it was great. There were smaller classes, they could get one-on-one attention, but it's very different from the pressure of the day-to-day. And so it gave teachers a break. It gave students a break where they could work more specifically on hands-on, and I would like to see that teaching throughout the year. So I think we gained much more. I don't think we lost anything, but I do think we gained more than we anticipated, not only on the instructional level, but also on the support level for our staff and some of our students. It wasn't just a free week because I think you all asked, are kids just gonna play and it's just a free week? No, they had smaller activities and things to do, but it's still not the same as being back. Being back to school and going through the pandemic has had several different types has brought about several different types of concerns, and has brought about enormous fatigue for our, I'm using the term fatigue, for our staff and our students. The world is very different in school, and we have to reacclimate our children to school.
Fatigue and stress.
Fatigue and stress, yes, sir. So I think we, overall as a division, gained far more than we anticipated.
Okay, Ms. Stiff, you have a question?
Yes, I'll make it quick because our time is.
Yeah.
We talked about the surveys from the teachers and from the parents. If you had, I wonder if you had an opportunity to maybe gather some surveys from those students that could possibly have answered a survey. And my other question is, how do we plan to advertise? What's the PR activity? What activities are being considered to jumpstart the next intercession?
So the first question is, yes, we could launch surveys for our students. That's not a problem. And I would definitely take that in consideration for March. March intercession we have not begun discussions around March intercession just yet. Right now, we're coming off our Hvac, and we're about to put out, we were waiting for the conclusion of this meeting to put out a press release in regards to intercession to inform our community in regards to how intercession operated and how successful it was. And then we'll start planning for March. We like to start sooner than later. Ensure that our parents are receiving the proper communication in regards to topics and questions. What data points are we going to use for March intercession will have to be discussed as well. So.
Okay. And is it possible that a student can give a blurb or something just so that the student is saying it was something like, it was good for me to come join dinner?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's good.
Okay.
Good suggestion. Thank you, Ms. Dennis. Thank you, John. Ms. Johnson, any other questions? It is, now 5:30, well, almost 5:35 now. We are in public participation. Do we have anyone sign up? No?
There's no one. No one signed up.
Oh, no one signed up, okay. Can we take a 5-minute break? Just for 5 minutes. And then we'll come back and continue on with the, okay. And there's, then we need to go on with the information items here with the year. Yes. We'll do that right after the break, okay? 5 minutes.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my
How
pleasure.
are y'all doing?
Good.
Good.
Hey, Michelle, I heard you got a fourth grade teacher signed up for this MPC.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, we pushed it, so I'm glad somebody took the opportunity. Who is it, do you know?
No, I don't know, I didn't know her name. But there's only a few to teach math and science.
Yeah, we
right?
only have like 2.
Yeah.
Like, well, we're 4.
Yeah,
It's 4.
there's 6,
8.
8, okay, it's half of them, yeah.
That's like half and half, because they do like math and science and English and history.
Right, exactly.
So it's very much, but I'm glad somebody is taking that.
Yeah.
That will be great. Original work. So wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you for making that connection.
Yeah, there's time still. I think I'm supposed to talk at there's a Readiness meeting tomorrow morning, is that right?
Yes, Dr. Sip Johnson attends that meeting.
Okay.
So she will be there. I'm on the committee, but don't really, I was there last year. I've always been a part of the council. I still stay a part of it, but she attends for the division. Split, divide and conquer. So.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's what Paul was doing. She's like, will you talk at it this time?
Yeah.
Tell me more about the, I need to get the Zoom link from her, I think. I don't think I have it.
Oh,
I'll figure it out.
yeah.
All right, good to see you. Tell Jesse I said hello. All right, see you, Ben. All right, see you, Ben. Bye.
Yeah, so that's all good. It's a good whole group.
Yeah. I've never been to it before. Paula usually.
She does. And then Dr. Lapaccia. Attends usually. Sometimes different ones will attend. With the power to grow will attend sometimes. I think it just depends on whatever it is.
Yeah,
Whatever the time. Somebody's registered for that. That's exciting.
I was cold.
You doing all right with the intercession? Intercession Now, 6.
Yeah, no, we don't get a break.
A few less fires maybe to put out.
No, we were busy, I mean, visiting, definitely visiting, it was a very busy week for us, because we wanted to see what was going on.
Right.
So we were busy, out with schools, talking to kids and teachers, and business as usual for us.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks Central Office gets a break in the summer too, but we don't get a break in the summer either.
Oh, come on, you don't reduce hours at all?
We actually increase hours.
It's very busy, we work 10 hours, well, we work 4
We work 10-hour days, so that we can close on Fridays.
Yeah, well, that's a nice, but, that's our busiest time of the year, because we're getting ready for the new school year.
Yeah.
If anything, like, December is a quieter month, because, but not for everybody, because we're testing, so like, that's a really busy time for our testing.
Does everybody test, or is it just, like, is high school block schedule? Okay, so they always test.
So they're testing in December.
Yeah, you test middle school and elementary too.
No, December. No, but they're benchmark testing. So there's always some kind of
Hey, 4 months now.
I guess that's kind of a mantra of school these days, right? There's always some type of check that.
sadly.
Okay, how about,
We were doing
Intercessions,
based off data that we just received.
I was just putting my stuff here.
I am,
Yeah, we're both in the files department.
Are you guys going to be
I will, yeah, next week. Yeah, that'd be good. I'd love to see more school board people.
But that was that's a learning.
Yeah.
Good break. We had enough data before those. That we could do something. So.
So next time we can, moving on to the agenda.
Since it's vertical, I'm just gonna have to scroll and try to keep up with you.
Oh, yeah, you'll keep up with me.
I know. You just tell me where to go.
Yeah. You're
It's weird to do that.
Yeah, that's what,
You lose your reach.
Just curious.
All right, good. Oh, no. Okay, so, thank you for that 5 minutes. Okay, we're gonna continue on, looking on the 13th with, the beginning of the year, is that you, Dr.
That is,
Dr.
Dr.
Wallace, how are you?
We're going to discuss our quantitative data, including our benchmarks, as well as PALS and Vkrp, which is Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program. Dr. Wallace?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Johnson. Tonight, we're going to look at our data. So you've already seen that we talk a lot about data, using that Intersession data. This is some additional data that we use as we identify children, partly for those Intercession programs as well as for remediation during the school day. The first one, and typically we've just looked at benchmark data, but last year I think these screeners were looked at separately, but I felt that maybe you would like to see, this is kind of what we expect of our schools, where we look at data in different ways. And this is one of their screening tools that they use at the elementary school. So I've included it with the entire data presentation. We just had a big data dig on Monday, although it seems like last week since we had that meeting. But Monday, our schools presented their data to us, and PALS was one of those pieces of data. PALS is probably what you've heard teachers talk about, but it is phonological awareness literacy screening. And we do this with our kindergarten through grade 3 students. And so the data is there for the last
for the historical 3 years, but you'll see that the number of students that we identified for this year, for kindergarten, it's in that last column, so if you take your eyes to that last column, these are the number of students identified as needing additional services where they, have difficulties with literacy skills or phonics skills, letter recognition at the lower grades, word recognition as they increase in grade levels, like sight words. So the 3 years of data is there to kind of show you, and you can kind of look at the trends of the 3 purple columns as you go across. But definitely the pandemic has had an impact on our students. This further demonstrates how our students have suffered from the pandemic. If you look at kindergarten in the fall of 1920, 37 students were identified in the fall in kindergarten. If you follow that to where they were in the first grade the next year, there were 50 students identified. That was after that short stint of closure from 19 to 20. And then when you look at this year, when those students are now in second grade, they have further fallen behind with some of their phonics and literacy skills. This data certainly, just like our SOL data that we did in the spring, certainly identifies the areas where our students really need to work on those literacy skills of reading. When students have difficulty reading, they have difficulty taking assessments that we give to them. So just, keep that in mind. But this table just demonstrates to you, again, the struggles that our students have had since the pandemic began. The next data that we're going to look at is called Virginia Kindergarten Readiness Program. We refer to it as Vkrp. This assessment is another screener. It is given to every child in kindergarten and pre-K, and it helps teachers identify the skills that students are coming to us with. So this is kind of a different screener because it's looking at their school readiness skills. So that readiness is telling us how prepared students are to come into the kindergarten or the pre-K classroom. This particular assessment looks at mathematics skills, mathematics process skills, literacy skills, but it also looks at what's called self-regulation and social skills. That refers to how they can control themselves, their social skills, their well-being overall. And then you can see from the 2 charts their geometry, patterning, numeracy, and computation skills. So what this data is telling us is when we look at, for example, average of well-being and social skills with your pre-K students, that's a pretty decent score in the 79 to 84% range, and their self-regulation skills. But for pre-K students coming in, that's really not bad. That is not bad. So it's telling us that kids are coming to us ready to learn based on this. Now, they're not coming with 100% math skills because if you think about it, they probably didn't work on a whole lot of math in their first 4 years of life. So, but they do have some mathematical reasoning skills. But this helps us identify where we need to go from here. So that's why it's called a screening tool. And then if we look at the kindergarten data, so if you'll scroll down to the next chart, this would be students who would be pre-K age last year. But remember, not all of our kindergarten students this year came to pre-K last year. Some of them stayed home. Some of them did not come to school due to the pandemic. And so, again, this data is just, telling us where we need to start. But again, the data doesn't it tells us our students are coming, they're coming ready to learn. And so that's all very positive. The next data we're going to look at is our benchmark data. And so our benchmark data, you'll recall looking at this last year, very similar comparison. The first column is where we were 2 years ago prior to the pandemic. The second column is last year, and the final column is this year. And remember, if you think about our SOL scores and where we were last year with SOL scores, students still have skills that they're trying to learn. So these assessments are on their grade level. But remember, they still are behind from last year. So our teachers are doing both trying to catch them up to help remediate those last year skills that they might be missing. And then they are also trying to teach this year's content and skills. And so this is the data. And, the data kind of speaks for itself. I think that we're on a trajectory of making some improvements back to where we were. We're not there yet, though. And then when you consider that some of, the students in the second column from last year, while they were taught those skills last year, they also came with some good foundational knowledge because they had finished up until about March. So when you consider that final column, it might look like we've taken, a downturn, but when you consider that those students came with some deficit skills, I don't know that they necessarily did. We still need to keep our eye on it. We want our teachers using our curriculum and our curriculum documents and aligned instruction and all of those things. But as Dr. Johnson has already indicated, it's been still a very difficult year this year. We are not out of the pandemic, and the data certainly indicates that. If you scroll down to the chart, this is just a different way of looking at the data. So we didn't test our second grade students the previous 2 years with this particular benchmark, and so that just kind of gives you an idea of why those dashes are there. But again, you can follow these students from third grade and then to the fourth grade to fifth grade to see kind of where those student groups are. And when you do that, you see that some of those skills are still impacted from the pandemic. We'll go on next to the math data. This is the math data, grades 2 through 7. And again, same scenario. So I'll just let you have a minute there to look at that data. There are some glimmers of hope. That Math 6 it's actually improved that's a better score pass rate than from 2 years ago. But we also have a different number of testers. So when you're looking at the data, it's also important to consider the number of students that are being assessed. That's fairly stable from year to year in grade level, but it can change. So we'll look at the table. Now, one thing I want to point out to you beginning with this page, you'll notice the asterisks that are on those tests. And we use a benchmark system called CIP. It's Comprehensive Instructional Planning. I always want to call it improvement, but it's Comprehensive Instructional Planning. We purchase their curriculum materials as well as their benchmark system, and they provide the benchmarks. It is, we based our pacing guides based off of the pacing of their benchmarks when we developed our new curriculum. However, this year they made a change. We use what's called Performance Matters as a testing system, so it's just a vendor. They also have a new vendor that they're serving. So the assessments that they created and provide to us are assessments that have to be legally can be used on both Performance Matters and the other assessment piece.
So they had to rework some of their benchmarks this year. So this is an organization that we've been participating with for several years now. But this is the first time they've had to do a big revamp of their benchmarks. And Prince Edward was one of the first divisions to test because we started early, which meant that we took some of the very first benchmarks. Well, Prince Edward was one of the first divisions to discover errors and report them to CIP. They had some errors on their test, and because our students had already started testing, we could not stop testing and have them retest once they corrected the errors. So we have noted on the data that our data may not be 100% valid because there were CIP errors on the test. And so therefore it's very important for you to know that. We did not know that the errors were there prior to students testing, and certainly are not going to make students retest after an error has been discovered. But the data is locked. So once you start on that path, you cannot change, and the data is locked, and they cannot correct the data on the backside. And so therefore, you'll see the asterisks on assessments where this affected us. And there are a variety of errors that could have occurred. We have a whole list of errors that were provided to us on an error log. And so there were more errors than some of the errors were caught before we tested, so that was a good thing. It didn't affect us. And some of the errors were not caught until after we tested. Some of them do not have a high impact, for example, but some of them do. For example, the Math 3 had 2 incorrect answers marked as correct. It was not caught in time, and so the Math 3 data had a high impact. So we may have had higher scores. We don't know. So it's important for you to know that, because we didn't want to come to you with no data, but we wanted you to understand the data situation that we have.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How does incorrect, possibly incorrect data, because of the errors that were in the test, how does this data actually help us to determine what it is we need to do when the data is incorrect, when the data is possibly incorrect?
So that's a great...
I really see, here again, another element of a wrong being done here, but yet still, we're going to hang this at our students' feet anyway, even though we know the data is incorrect. I'm having a hard time with it.
So these are not Prince Edward County Public School benchmarks. That's one important thing for us to know. So this is not a fault of staff in Prince Edward County. So that,
yeah, I understand.
okay. Okay, I just want to make sure that everyone in the room understood that. And your point is well taken, Ms. Stiff. Now, I will say this. If our teachers use the student level data, which you do not see because we don't present student level data in a public forum, the teachers can actually still benefit from the assessment data on the back end, because they will be able, if there's one question that's wrong out of 25.
And generally it's 1 out of about 25, so we're talking, you have 24 good questions that you can see.
There are 24 good questions. If we know question number 7 is no good, then we just let our eyes glance and over that data. We can still see how the student scored, and we can even look and see if, according to the correct score, what they would have, if they would have gotten it correct. So if our teachers are using the student level data, the assessments still are beneficial.
And that is the purpose of benchmark data. Benchmark data is really for teacher use to make sure that we're addressing the skills that students need.
But your point is well taken, Ms. Stiff, because it is very frustrating from the administrative and the teacher level to know that you gave an assessment and then you have to go back and recheck that data and see how it might have impacted something. Which is why...
Very true, and yet still, we still don't know to some degree Johnny's actual performance on a particular aspect of the test, because that particular hard one to maybe flawed.
Right, but there are usually multiple questions.
So moving forward to the next set of benchmarks, would all of the possibility of flawed items on the test, etc., would that be cleared up by the time they take another set of benchmark tests?
Well, they are doing additional checks on the benchmark questions for the company that created the benchmarks. But I cannot guarantee that there won't be errors next time. But hopefully there is heightened awareness and they will do a good job of reviewing those assessments coming up in December.
And I need to go back to the fact that benchmark testing is for the purpose of teachers being able to identify the necessary skills that they need to teach or reteach. So the expectation is that teachers are using that benchmark data on an individual student level. And they have a list of errors. So we all know what the errors are. So again, if you're looking at Johnny, and Johnny got 7 wrong, and you know that 7 was an incorrect question, then you just don't look at 7, but look at the rest of the other 24 questions, because if on average 1 out of 25 questions is wrong, then it's still very useful data on a student level. And if you want to talk about how we're going to move instruction, you're going to do it on a student level in the classroom. So it's still very useful for teachers. But again, we need to share with you that we did have the benchmarks. These are the scores from the benchmarks, and we recognize that as a division, we can't really use a lot of this information, because as a division, when you compile it and look at it holistically, it doesn't help me. But it does help children if a teacher uses the information correctly. So I want to make sure that I re-emphasize that we just can't throw it all out, because there is some useful data here.
And typically on an assessment, there's not just one question for one skill. There are multiple questions for that skill. So the teacher can look at those other questions within that skill or standard and determine where the needs are for that student.
And there is an offer for any board member that would like to see how Performance Matters works, that we can offer that opportunity to you. Just let us know so that we can do a date where people can come and look at it. But much like we did with some of the elementary assessments a few years ago, if you're really interested in Performance Matters. But again, the data can be used quite effectively at the right level and for the right things.
So we'll go on to the high school data, 8th grade through high school. This is typically your algebra courses, algebra, pre-algebra, algebra, and geometry. And this is for middle and high. Again, same kind of path. There was only one assessment that had an error on it. and that was the midterm for the high school geometry. However, just looking at the data, again, same scenario. And in some cases, we're back to where we were pre-pandemic or better. So when you look at 8th grade math, that's better than we were a couple of years ago. And when you look at Algebra 1 for the middle school, again, that's on the left side. That's almost back to where we were a couple of years ago. So there are some improvements. Algebra 2, some improvements there. And we hope that that's because of our curriculum that we have implemented. And the final, well, no, not the final. The next set is the science data. And the science data, we have biology and chemistry at the high school level, and then science 4th and 5th grade. And you can see the data comparisons there. So, still some challenges. And science is a progressional. There are progressional skills, a lot of repeat skills. And so again, if students had missed some of those skills when they were in the 3rd grade, and now they're in the 5th grade, it's understandable that those scores will be a little lower. And primarily, we did a lot of science experiments and things like that last year while they were home, but they were learning, at home and not necessarily had all the resources. Science is a very hands-on type of content area. The final look is at history. And this is our middle and high school history classes. And so when you look at that data, Virginia and U.S. looks a little bit better than it did a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. The other ones are very similar to last year. The final set of data that we'd like to share with you is, you just stop right there at the description, is our growth assessment data. So this is a new assessment that Virginia is doing now. Based on legislation passed in 2021, Virginia is required to give assessments in the fall and spring in grades 3 through 8, reading and math. Next year, the same type of assessment, growth assessment, will be administered 3 times a year. We anticipate that this type of assessment will take the place of our benchmarks in reading and math for grades 3 through 8, because it is measuring the students' growth in the current school year, and it will be next year the actual SOL test for those students, which they will take 3 times a year in grades 3 through 8. So this year, the assessments that students took in the fall was based on the previous grade level's content. So with the exception of 3rd grade. So 4th grade tested on 3rd grade skills. 5th grade tested on 4th grade skills. Okay? And so on. The way that the state designed these assessments for this year is basically it's a transition year of this assessment. The intent of this year's assessment is really to help teachers identify unfinished learning from 2020-2021 due to the pandemic. And if you remember, Dr. Stith Johnson mentioned that we use the growth assessment data to determine the areas that we focused on for intercession. We had just taken these assessments and we looked at the data, and it is very student specific. So you're not going to see pass rates. You're not going to see that X number of students passed the growth assessment. That is not how the growth assessments work. It works on an individual student basis. For accreditation purposes, this data will be used to help measure if a student grew this year in their skills. And if they did, it kind of counts as a pass and counts towards accreditation in a positive way. So this year for English and math in grades 3 through 8, there are 3 ways that a student's score can count at the end of the year towards accreditation. One is passing the SOL test with a 400 or above. If they pass the SOL test, then we get a pass. The second way is on this growth assessment. If Johnny scored a certain score that was below standard at the beginning of the year, and Johnny shows growth by the end of the year, then that counts towards our schools as a pass. If Johnny was a 3rd grade student, that's the second way. The third way is if Johnny was a 3rd grade student last year and is a 4th grade student this year, Johnny would have taken the SOL test last year. If Johnny didn't pass his SOL last year, but got better this year, and maybe didn't even pass this year, but still grew from last year to this year, that also counts as student growth. So this year, the state is being very flexible with how that growth is being calculated. That is this year only. Next year, the growth will be all on the growth assessment data. And it will measure beginning, middle, and end. And if Johnny passes the SOL by the end of the year, then that counts. But if Johnny grew from beginning to middle to end, that also would count. And so when you look at this data, it's going to look very different than SOL data. So SOL data usually has a scaled score. That scaled score is from 200 to 600. 400 being a pass, 600 being a perfect score, 200 being the least that you could get. The growth assessment data is measured on a scale of 900 to 2,000. It is not anything that our teachers are used to looking at. It's not anything that we're used to looking at. It is a different scale because it is a different type of test. So what you're getting ready to look at the bottom of this chart, if you'll just go to the color code key, we have put into the chart a system that shows you if a scale score falls below, so DOE did this equivalence. Okay, so if a scaled score was at 375, they did an equivalence of what it would be on the 900 to 2,000 scale. So if it falls below what would be equivalent to a 375, then we coded it red. Now 375 is not passing, but 375 is the point at which students would be able to retake an SOL for a second try. The yellow is a very small margin, and it would be the 375 to 400 equivalent score. So that's the point at which a student is very close to passing that SOL. And then the green is where the scaled score falls above that 400 equivalent SOL score. So when we look at this data, you're going to see numbers in the thousands, okay? We did not do an average score. We used a mean score. So that means we went right down the middle. So we know 50% of our students are below that and 50% are above that. Okay? So now when you look at the data, you can see that for 3rd grade math, the mean score for our students was 1278. The equivalent on the SOL score to be 375 would be 1367. And that small margin between 375 and 400, the score would be a 1401. Because our score fell below the 375 mark, we color coded it red. Okay? Now, our students, this is for all students. So this is our median score. We know 50% scored above that, 50% scored below that. That does not, so we had students that likely fell closer to the 1401 or above that. We also had students that were below the 1367. So that's what this data is telling us. Now, this is not very helpful for teachers in this form. So in addition to this data, teachers also have detailed data on what specific SOL that students did not perform or did perform well on. And so they can actually use that data. We've set up charts for teachers to use that if they are working on standard 3.1A, they can pull the data up from the growth assessment for 3.1A and determine which students out of that particular group of students passed that skill on the growth assessment and which students did not. So they know basically from that data very specifically what skills students need to work on, which is why that data was used for Intercession to work on specific skills. So the data in itself, in this form, really just helps you get context around how many students fell below that 375 mark, how many fell in that range between 375 and 400, and how many went above 400. And so if you look at 7th grade reading, we had a green there. That means that 50% of our students scored above that 1616, and the 1616 was above the 400 range. Now remember, this is a growth assessment. So you kind of want it's kind of a good signal to have lower scores because we're trying to improve their skills by the end of the year. So what we'll be monitoring is how those skills improve during the school year. Now, we won't have another test until the end of the year. So that's the downside to this year's implementation because we don't have a measurement mid-year.
Another growth assessment.
Another growth assessment, right. But we do have other measurements that are like the benchmarks, for example. But we would, teachers then, that's where the student data is so important because then they can see what the skills were on the growth assessment, what the skills are they've been working on, look at their benchmark assessment. Did that benchmark address those skills? How did the student do? Is the student growing? This is partly why teachers are exhausted. They are looking at this data and using data to really make informed decisions and help our children. Are there questions? Yes.
What you're saying is that next year the students are going to have to take 4 state tests, the 3 for the growth and then the 1 for the SOL. No.
This will be the SOL.
So what do they do? Average the 3 together or take the less?
Mr. Walker?
Okay. So they will take 3 assessments, 2 growth assessments and 1 standard SOL. The 2 growth assessments will be in the fall and then in December or January timeframe, with then the regular SOL happening at the springtime at the end of the year. That's for our 2nd grade to 8th grade. The 2 growth assessments are much shorter. They're only going to have about 20, 25 questions. The full SOL will have about 35 to 45. It depends on the grade level. And so the reason they're using a new number that is up to 2,000 is so that they can compare all 3, because you don't have a pass rate for the growth assessment. They don't get a pass-fail on those. So it's a way to have a similar number to measure against all 3. They can measure the growth, is what they're doing.
And then we get rid of the benchmark tests. in
That's-
the week.
That's a possibility.
That's a possibility.
Yes, that's a possibility. We don't want to overtest our students, and there's always the concern that you're overtesting, but we also have to make sure that this actually happens, that it happens on time, and where we are with CIP. Eventually, we may not be using CIP as our benchmark system, but that's eventually. We have to see where our students are, see what kind of data we're collecting from these other assessments.
Another question, with the error that they found, when do our people get a chance to even look at the test to see if there is an error? The day the test is given, right? That's our thought.
Yes, you understand test security, and we
Yeah.
try to do benchmarks under secure testing conditions.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What happens if this growth assessment is from the fall to the mid-year, and the child does not show growth?
That's going to indicate for the teacher what they need to do to continue to give the supports to that student. So that's where we will use the data to determine instructional supports for that student.
And know that with all of these assessments, with performance matters, that the principals are able to, and we are too, but the principals are able to drill down per teacher and per student. So the principals have all of that information, and they can look at a specific classroom and that classroom scores versus another classroom and classroom scores. So again, there's several different ways to look at the data.
For it means for the SR test at the end of the school year, it covers the entire school's knowledge learned. So for the two growth assessment, so it means they just test what they have learned during that period, right? For example, for the first one, they just cover the first 9 weeks. Maybe the second one just cover the second 9 weeks.
That's the benchmarks. That's how the benchmark assessments are designed. The growth assessments are a test, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker is our coordinator of assessment, so that's why he's getting a lot of these questions. He's been involved in all the training, but the growth assessments are going to give students questions, and if they don't get that question right, it's going to go down to a different skill. Is that correct?
Yes, they are,
Weighted.
now the word's not coming to my head. Not weighted,
Can you get the question?
CAT testing, what does CAT stand for again? I've got it off the top of my head. Computer adaptive.
Computer adaptive.
It
So,
adapts to the
yes.
student, so if a
None of
student-
us can think of the word adaptive. They are adaptive tests.
It's in there.
There are, yeah.
They are adaptive, so they will change the next questions that the student receives based on how well the student is doing on the prior questions. So if it presents a hard question and the student does not get it, it will actually reduce the difficulty, which is why these vertical scores are necessary, because it is very much not like an SOL. Now, some SOLs are a computer adaptive, but that's why they have to measure these all against each other with a similar scale.
So another question around growth assessments. We are on, if we look at our high school schedule, we are on a 4x4, and we change, so you'll finish a class by December. So at that point, do you only get the one do you get growth assessments for high school at all?
No.
Is really the question.
It's a second grade through eighth grade. Well, second grade in the sense that it would be third grade to eighth grade. This
Right.
one, technically, the third graders took a second grade standards. But
So the SOL, so when we talk about benchmarks and end of course testing, that does not fit this model. I just want to make that
No.
point.
High school students do not test on a
No.
growth assessment. They only test the traditional SOL format.
But they do take in some courses benchmarks. Just
They
depends on
do,
what
yeah.
the
They
course
take, yes, they take the benchmarks in the courses that are what we call end of course test. And those end-of-course tests are the ones that qualify for the standards of learning assessment at the end of the course.
So, you sort of indicated some concern with the one that we're actually passing in
No.
7th grade.
No concern. I think it's great.
Okay, but does it actually flex? If it doesn't show growth, would it flex to SOL? As one of the things, that's what they would measure us by, how, you know.
The first measure is SOL. The first measure is, did the student pass the SOL?
Okay.
That's the first measure.
Okay, so if we are passing SOLs, we're just clear from that.
Yeah.
Not having to look at growth,
Yeah.
right? Is that right? Okay.
I mean, we'll still look at growth because we'll still have the data.
Okay.
But
growth
for
would
accreditation,
be deemed for growth.
accreditation purposes,
Right.
if you get, your student can only count one way.
Okay.
The first way, and the way we want students, is to pass the SOL test. But if they don't pass the SOL test, and recognizing the conditions of the pandemic, the state has these growth assessments that do help to show growth.
Okay, so it's an ongoing green.
Right, and growth has always been, has been around for about 4 years now, 3-4 years now, where they actually look at it in a different way. But the way that the state previously looked at growth, it was, did the student make progress from their 3rd grade SOL to their 4th grade SOL, which is not measuring growth of a school year. A true measurement of growth is from the current year that they are in, not year to year.
And I think that it is important to understand this is different this year because these are all from the previous year. So, for example, the 7th grade, this is a measure of 6th grade standards. So this tells us that the majority of our 7th grade reading students were prepared and they had all the 6th grade knowledge ready to go for the 7th grade year. That's what that means. Now, if they show growth, maybe they don't show growth from this score to the end of the year. But if they show growth from the SOL last year, the 6th grade SOL they took, that counts too. So they're giving us multiple ways to show growth.
For this year only.
So this is it's a strange year for this data.
Right. Thank you, Mr.
I have one more.
Okay.
And this is, when you were looking at the data, and we clearly the data is not showing the efforts, okay? And there's a lot of push. I'm sure there's a lot of push, and get this up and everything. Now, and with that, we know that there's going to be built in a whole bunch of stress on everybody's behalf. How are we dealing with that? You know, are we prepared for the break? You know, it's just kind of it's a question I'm throwing out. Just from the division, because we're pushing and then and it's hard when we're pushing and then in spite of our efforts, we're not making ground. Then the scores are not reflecting. And then there becomes apathy and all of those things that comes along with it because people and frustration and because people
frustration more than apathy. Yes,
right. Eventually, it'll be apathy after the frustration occurs.
So what is the question? How are we as a division trying to address making sure that we don't become apathetic?
Right.
We point to, for the teachers, we remind them of the small successes that we have. So a teacher can look at this again is division wide. But if a teacher is looking at her individual data and she has 15 children and 7 of those children were successful, well, that's your small success. And when Dr. Gurr asked, so what did she do for that 7 that she needs to do for the others to help them move forward as well? And so we try to make sure that teachers are looking at whatever small success and that principals are reminding them that, yes, you're right, we're pushing. But we hear you and we see you and we know your efforts. And sometimes we put forth effort in the wrong things. And so we also use it as an opportunity to help people grow, and that's even at a central office level. I'll give you a non-testing example. When we look at data, some of us who are not as tech savvy all the time would use an Excel spreadsheet and we would pull things out manually and not know how to use pivot tables. And so let's say that I spend hours doing that. Well, that's a lot of energy and a lot of effort, when in fact I could have used the pivot table and could have done it in 10 minutes. And so we're also trying to help each other and teachers and again, central office staff figure out how to use our time most effectively when we're looking at data. So Mr. Walker does a lot of sessions on how to use Performance Matters, how to get to the information you want about a student quickly. And we help each other. Pivot tables is a perfect example because all the administrators took a class conducted by another administrator on how to use pivot tables. So we don't waste hours trying to pull this kind of data when we can figure out how to do it more quickly and we can use it and move on to the next thing. So we're trying to make sure that we build skills in our staff as they continue to build skills with their students so that we don't get to so we're using our time more effectively. Because you are right, we are pushing and everybody is fatigued and stressed. But
when you're not really seeing,
and
not
the
necessarily seeing the results that you might.
See, and that's the interesting piece that I think that's the general perception that we are not growing or that children are not growing because everybody looks at solely the quantitative data as the indicator of growth. And that's simply not true. And the state does a great job of giving us credit and looking at all of the pieces that we have to put in place as part of the infrastructure, as part of looking at data, as part of the socio-emotional. The state actually gives us credit for all of those things, and it's very difficult to get the general public to understand we are growing, and our kids are growing, but it's going to take a lot of time because we are behind academically, but it's coming. The infrastructure is in place. We didn't have something like this. We didn't have, even before we got to this piece, if you look at all of the other data pieces, the data digs, how we present data, how we talk about data, that's very new to some of our staff members. And it's now in a very organized way, so it's part of the Prince Edward County's culture. And that's what's required, a shift in culture to make the huge leaps that we need to make. And you're right, and I want to say again publicly, our staff is doing a very focused job of getting to the place we need to be. We're just not there yet. We're just not there yet.
Dr. Bear? Yes, last time our elementary school was fully accredited.
Yes.
It mainly because they just compare the scores, SO scores. So because it increased so much.
Yes.
Okay. So it's fully accredited. Right now, they are using this system. It means we have to see the greens. Okay, it doesn't mean, for example, last year we got for example, 1278. This year we increased a lot. We increased 200 points or 300 points, 400 points. At the previous, when they said increase 400 points, we can be free accredited. This time, we cannot count the data, so it means we have to see the green only, right?
Mr. Walker is.
No, so for example, the state will give us a range. Let's say this 1278, but we're talking, this is all students combined. Let's say we're talking about a single student. I scored a 1278 on my assessment. For me to be measured to get that growth point toward accreditation, my goal might only be a 1350. So even though my 1350 is still not a passing score. I've shown a significant enough amount of growth from that assessment to the next one to get me that accreditation score. The state has that calculation, and that's something we're going to be breaking down this year, so we know for each student, okay, you know, you get 75 points on this vertical score, and that gets that growth credit.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, so remember, we're looking at data here. That's a median score for that grade level. But what really makes the difference has nothing to do with the median score there. It's the individual student that makes a difference on accreditation.
Let me sound elementary for the elementary school. Third grade math teachers, when they teach them a certain skill to the kids, when do they assess whether they're successful with that particular skill or not? For instance, if I'm teaching a math skill in the third grade, I'm teaching, do I do the assessment on Fridays or do an assessment every second week to make sure the skills have been met?
It varies. So we're actually building with our curriculum documents, and we're doing training. We actually just delivered training on this a couple of weeks ago for our training teams, and they will be training the rest of the schools on this. But the right way to test students and assess them on those skills is through a balanced assessment approach. And that balanced assessment approach means they use multiple methods to assess the students. They don't just rely on one test given at the beginning of the year. They don't just rely on the unit test that might be given at the end of the unit. So So teachers are doing formative assessments, which are those quick checks, you know, during the school day, after they have learned a skill. It can be in multiple forms. And teachers are already doing that. They're doing it maybe in the form of exit tickets, or they're doing it in the form of even using their desk as a write board, and they write on their desk and the answers for the math problems, and then they erase it. That's why we go through dry erase pens, because the kids can actually work problems out, and the teachers can walk around and they can assess if the student knows or understands that skill. Yes, that occurs daily on multiple skills. And then with our curriculum document, building out that assessment column in our curriculum document, they're also doing other assessments, which might be a unit test, particularly as your grade levels go up. Our middle school has created a whole battery of tests, which they refer to as common formative assessments. Those common formative assessments are similar to kind of like the unit tests that go along with the curriculum. Then we also have, just your benchmark assessments. That's part of that whole assessment plan, that balanced assessment approach. And what we're also introducing to teachers through our training is performance assessment tasks, which are tasks that are, for example, in science, it might be that the students are testing something with energy and motion or force. And so they have a task that they are creating or that they're doing that helps the teacher assess whether that student understands that concept or not. So that also is ever evolving. And as Dr. Johnson said, with all of these changes, this is it's a culture around how we teach and assess students. It's changing that culture, and that takes time. That takes true school improvement, takes 3 to 5 years, and that's without a pandemic. Okay? So when you have a pandemic, you start from ground zero again because you lose traction. Or when you have some major event happen in a school or a division, that also means that you lose traction. We built a curriculum last year. That's the ground level. This year we're implementing that curriculum and building out those assessments. That's kind of step number 2. And as we're implementing it, we're having to make revisions because we have more resources that we can add, or maybe we had a resource that didn't work that we want to take away. So all of that it takes time. But rest assured, they're not just waiting every week and assessing a skill or every 2 weeks and assessing a skill.
That's what I'm saying, especially word problems.
Oh, yes.
Kids doing the timetables and the revision and stuff like that.
Oh, I saw the best lesson a couple of weeks ago, but with doing just that word problem, so.
Yeah, that's important. Now, the curriculum that you're doing now, the new, it's really updated, that's based on core curriculum content standards?
No, ma'am, that's based on the standards of learning for Virginia.
Oh, that's-
Virginia does not use the core curriculum.
I should know that. You just use that. Okay.
I know, it's okay. But it is based on the standards of learning and the curriculum framework that Virginia puts out.
Other questions for Dr. Wallace? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next thing. All right, and Dr. Johnson?
Monthly, we provide you with a corrective action update. And we actually have a meeting tomorrow, and I say we, that would include Ms. Womack and Ms. Carson, and myself and Dr. Wallace, with Dr. Lane and Mr. Gecker, and another member of the state board. And during that time, we'll talk about the COVID-19 impact, the impact that it has had, and we will look at a lot of the data that we looked at today. We'll talk about attendance and enrollment, the fall growth assessments, which we just discussed. We'll talk about vacancies, the curriculum continuum, which Dr. Wallace just made reference, and we'll talk about balanced assessments. I should actually say balanced assessments and benchmarks. And that is tomorrow at 2:30.
2:30, I believe it's 2:30. I have 2 o'clock, 2:30.
And I'll double check the time. Then also, as an update, we have another meeting on Monday with the whole Office of School Quality team, where we will review things that they have requested and some of the things that we will review with Dr. Lane tomorrow. So that is also on Monday. That meeting is a 3-hour meeting, if I'm correct. I think that's from 1 to 4. And that will include myself, Dr. Wallace, and most of our coordinators, including Mr. Walker. And that is Monday. We continue to have, Dr. Cox is back there, our executive liaison with the state. He continues to visit us weekly. He had the opportunity to do some classroom walkthroughs with our instructional team on October 11th as well as October 29th. So he had the opportunity to view firsthand Intercession and what was happening in classrooms, as well as just a typical Friday at the high school. And so those are primarily the updates. Next month, we shall have quite a few updates for you, because we will have met with Mr. Gecker as well as Dr. Lane, as well as the whole office of OSQ. Again, just monitoring our progress and where we are, making sure that we are still on track for success. Questions about that? You also have, your links don't work in the memo, but if you look at your executive content, you see the agenda for tomorrow, along with all of the links, so that if you click on any of those links, you can see exactly what we're going to talk about. And that is the agenda for tomorrow, as well as the agenda for Monday.
You said that they won't, they're not
No. In the memo, they don't work.
Okay.
If you go down to executive content and you look for the one that says agenda cap progress monitoring, that is the one for tomorrow, those work. Mine works, so,
Yeah, it works on
but
here.
the files are mine, so yes.
Yeah, they work.
So you see what tomorrow will entail, but you also see what we're going to talk about. It says final agenda. You see that agenda as well for Monday. Now, the links have not been added to the agenda for Monday at this time. They have not been added.
Okay. Questions Dr. Johnson.
And next month or the month following, we will also, under academic discussions, include, based on our retreat, a section that says strategic plan. We didn't do that. We just had it. This month, there are no updates because there's so many state updates that we have to do.
All right, let's move on to number 15 on the agenda. School board management interest calendar.
Okay, so the calendar, if you look at the calendar, last month, you had November, I believe it was 22nd, for academic jackets. That date has been changed, and it's going to be sometime in January, there it is, January 20th, academic jacket ceremony at 6 p.m. And the reason it's been changed, quite honestly, is because of being able to get the jackets here. So that whole supply issue has impacted us as well, and we simply were not able to get the jackets here. So we moved the ceremony to January, hoping that everything is here and in place and we can have a wonderful time in the auditorium. Everything is moving very quickly. Interim reports are in 2 weeks. The VSBA conference. If you have not let Ms. McConville know, please let her know if you plan to attend, and if you plan to attend in person or virtually, if you have not done so already. So, and that leads us up to winter break. Leads us up to winter break into January.
Okay. Board member comments? Any comments? Dr. Durr?
I attended the football several times, and for the program, and sometimes we printed all student information, sometimes we didn't. For example, a lady, she said her first name is Susan, and she's a karate teacher, and she said one of her students is number 12, Tyler Bishop. Okay, so Tyler Bishop presented at the game. Sometimes he also wanted to play, but not always, because most time he's on the line, on the sideline. And the Susan complained Tyler's name was not on the program, so repeated. So, but actually the student was actually played. Actually, I also took a picture. I can give you the evidence. That one just played occasionally as a replacement. So I think my concern is if a student indeed played, okay, then just put the student's name on the program.
What sport was this?
Football.
Dr. Johnson?
Yeah, I went to the governor's school board meeting on November 21st. And one of the things that they're working on is a policy manual. You know, you used to know how big ours is. This is theirs. In a policy manual. It's been cut down, drastically to what we have. But they were like, with Mecklenburg, we don't know what they'll be doing in the next couple of years because of the possibility of consolidating schools and whether they'll stay in the governor's school system. And that brought up the question, or what if somebody starts here as a junior and we pay for him to go to the governor's school? He leaves us at the end of that year. Who should pay the next year? And there are some people that are feeling it should be the original school because the original school paid for it. And then there are others who think that whatever school you're in, you pay for it. However, you have a bunch of students already selected, you know, to be going to the governor's school, and you have money set aside for those kids, where are you gonna get that other money for somebody who transfers in? So what the board, you know, did was refer it to the superintendents. Just so you know. And so that they, will come up with a, recommendation. The, group down at, Keithsville is going on a trip to the, Holocaust Museum in, Washington DC. They read through, had a book, this is kind of like a follow-up to the book they read. And they'll be spending a couple of days there. It's partially paid for by the, students, and partially by the money that's already in the budget of the governor's school. And we're talking about like 62 kids, and that will be going. And Alberta's not going mainly because of the fact that wasn't in their curriculum, and they didn't read that book. And then they're doing some changes mainly down in the Alberta campus, where some of the classes are going to have to be totally online, the ITT class, because of the fact that there's one teacher can't do both, so they're just doing it online. And they're really debating on whether if Mecklenburg stays, where will they go? Because I think part of them go to Keysville now, and then part of them go to Alberta. And one thing they're going to be doing this year is recruiting students who are going to actually in the classrooms, and to kind of tell the students, all about the program. And they used to do that, but again, COVID came in and put an end to that. And what they'll do is they'll come in and have meetings with the kids during the day, and then possibly that same night have a meeting with parents as well. So that parents are aware of what's going on. Because at government school, it's a good opportunity. And the students can get, a lot of credits towards college by, going to the government school. Not always do they transfer, but in the state's Virginia schools, all the credits do transfer. That was the meeting, the whole meeting only lasted 45 minutes. So, and the next meeting's in February.
What did you say the date of that meeting was?
21st of this
October?
October.
October.
So we're not going to meet again until February?
They only meet 4 times a year.
You have a question?
Another question, this is Woodward Thomas.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
What I like to see is something, I know we tried junior RTC programs some years ago, but I found like I said in one of the student discipline committee, I find that kids would really benefit from that program, the leadership skills, character building, organization skills, and many other great skills that they can learn through the junior RTC program. They also would take the kids, my son was part of that years ago with the Marine Corps, and they brought him down here to the Marine base, but they did some further training with the student. I realize it's expensive, but today I think we need that, because that gives the kids the idea of the right group to join. And the right group to join will be a junior RT program. It doesn't have to go to service, but your skills are second to none. And I'm just hoping that some place down that road that we'll be able to have another junior RTC program here in our schools, in our high school. That's what I like to see.
I think when we did have one, it was really beneficial, I think. When we did have one to the group. It was very, it's effective, and the kids, learned a lot, and respect, and but that's been a few years.
You have honor guard, you have honor guard and all those things, that comes with that program. As a result of that, my son became a New Jersey State Trooper, and moved over to lieutenant, now he's doing something else at the state level. But I think it prepares our children to move on and do other things better. And I think they'll serve us well in Prince Edward County.
I have a comment.
Ms. Dix?
A question rather. I received a call from a student, and the student wants to know why did Prince County stop having the homecoming day? And her expression was all about the things that it seems the high school students and the seniors, et cetera, are losing or not having as other students have had. So what would it entail, she asked, to reinstitute the homecoming dance?
Okay, so Prince Edward County has not had a homecoming dance in at least 7 or 8 years. Why they don't have a homecoming dance, I really don't know. That's a question that should be directed to the school administration as something that they are interested. School government, the seniors have, or all the grades, have officers, student government. That's a question for them to bring up in those forums that I know are functioning. I had the opportunity to talk to some members of the high school VTSS team, the students, and I will have the opportunity to talk to them again in November. It's something that they can bring up then, but that's where that conversation starts. It's not as if, at least under my tenure, that we have taken anything away. It's been gone long before I got here, so why that is, I don't know. We would have to do some research. I do know my first year here, there was a winter ball. The next year that I was here, they didn't have the winter ball because of weather. And then the next year was probably because of weather or poor attendance. They had it, but it was poor attendance. And then eventually COVID happened and we haven't had it since then. So again, that's just the students productively using their voice through their student government. That encourages leadership at that level, but that's where that conversation starts. And we are open to it, so they just need to organize.
Anya, I have a couple of comments. I just want to remind the school board members that we had said tentatively that we would meet with the VSBA on January the 12th. That was the tentative day. That's our next part of our training. And the 12th is a Wednesday.
When is that again? I'm sorry.
January, did I say November? I'm sorry. January the 12th. January the 12th. That was one of the dates she gave us. And a lot of you said that was a date that's okay. So please check the calendar there. But just to give you a heads up, the training probably will be from 9 to 2, like we did before, but that's also school board meeting day. And the school board will meet at 4 o'clock after that. So that's a long day, so just want you to be aware of that. Because I need to let her know that we want that date. Yeah.
I think I put my phone, always put the wrong dates in. I had January 19th.
That was one of the possible dates.
Okay.
That was one, she gave us like 2 or 3 possible dates. The January the 12th date was the one, several people said that was okay.
Now, another question. Is because we don't know how new board members come on or not.
Right.
Remember, we said the schedule, boardsmanship.
Yeah, this would
part
be,
of it?
yes, this
Okay.
would be part of it, boardsmanship, governance, those
Gotcha.
topics.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay? also
I need to confirm that date or.
I need to confirm the date with her. I need to let her know that January 12th is gonna work for us.
Is it likely to be here?
Yes. Likely to be like it was before. No, we had in October. I'm sorry? That's a board meeting day.
Concern,
Yes?
concern from me, I would like to see a change.
Any other suggestions or, comments around that day?
I also like to change. Too long,
Too long what?
for 2 meetings. You see, for this school board meeting, from 4 until now it's 7, okay?
Yeah.
Now another one, for that one is 9 to 2, so it means basically we'll be exhausted.
Yeah, we will be exhausted.
Could we consider 19th maybe, if they have it open for us?
What is the 19th?
This one, Wednesday.
On Wednesday?
But I would have
I don't
to-
know that they may be taken. I can try to look, if
I
not,
know I'm off already on that day.
on the 12th? Yeah. Okay.
The 19th or 12th?
I,
When we did the survey, what were the choices of the group?
I think it was the 12th and the 19th of 20, something like that. I wrote it down in the wrong hand. The 12th and the 19th, and I remember the 19th, and it was something else. It was another day. But as we were going out, people would, oh, yeah, the 12th works for me, the 12th works for me, the 12th works for me. So I just took that to be,
12 works for
the
me.
12th works for me.
If I'm on the board.
All right, well, I'll see what they have, but I'm just saying the 12th. We'll see what we can do. Also, Board of Supervisors meeting is Tuesday, and we did send in our, recommendation, thank you, for the options that we voted on last board meeting for the elementary school. And I'm pretty sure that's gonna come up at their meeting tomorrow. They have, ask that the chairman come and superintendent.
Tomorrow, next week.
Not to, it's
Next week.
next Tuesday. Yeah, the 9th, it's the 9th. And other board members are more than welcome to come. Okay? Put that out there. And one more thing,
There's a Tuesday night.
that's a Tuesday night, yes.
Is that
7:30 or 7:30.
Yes, I believe in a letter to the superintendent, I believe that communities, the people in this area supported, suggested that maybe one of those might want to come to show support.
Show support, yes, we would like any public, I'm sure they would like public participation to come to show support. Yes, that would be helpful. And it's Tuesday, November the 9th, 7:30. And one more thing I need to mention. We've talked a lot about the mental stress and the stress that teachers are under, that students are under, that administrators are under, that everybody's under. And the work we know that the schools, the teachers in the schools are doing their best. I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this, but you probably have read the papers or something. A lot of schools are giving extra, a couple of days off, and their mental health or extending a vacation, a time period. I know, we just
I
had.
saw that.
You saw that?
I saw that article.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a Wednesday, they were doing it on Wednesday.
Yes, one school, not on Wednesday, some schools have, I think Richmond, like this week, was out the whole week. And that's what they're doing. And then some schools are adding a couple of days to, a vacation time, time for regular time off time.
We're changing a half a day work day to a whole day off. And that way you don't have, instead of coming in for half a day, the students go home for half.
Yeah, that would be off the whole day, yeah,
And
students
then
are
that
out.
way it doesn't put calendars.
Yeah, maybe so, but is there something that we may want to think about? I know we have to go back and look at the calendar, and it would have to be a change in the calendar, but I'm just throwing that out there as a
I wonder,
possibility. Yeah.
I wonder if the superintendent might be able to, like, see
great, only because that wouldn't, that would give, we wouldn't have to meet, make a decision and do it. So that would be great. But let me put this out there because it came up internally with our own staff. So our staff suggested that because some school divisions are making that Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, some of them are calling them remote learning days. Some people are just saying it's part of the holiday. Various options, and it's being done that week of Thanksgiving. Now, we're already off that Wednesday. So my response to them was, no, I'm not going to make that recommendation to the board, but since the board has brought it up. So my recommendation to them, my comment to them was no, because our board has traditionally not wanted to have, you want equal days per semester. Like, so you want to do a 90-90, and we usually can't do 90-90. It's usually 88, 92, something like that. So we're already off, which is fine, but we are already off. And because that is an issue for our board, and because we already had Intercession, which was a week, for some students to be off, some students to be in school, you know, some teachers off, some teachers in school, that's 2 more days when you have to do 180 days. So that was my response overall to administrators who I'm sure went back and talked to teachers and staff, et cetera, because it has been in the paper, and whenever it's in the paper like that and if other districts are doing something, the question always comes up. Do I think that our children and staff need that time? Yes, because they're tired. But again, it becomes the board's pleasure. My response was, no, and this is why. But since the board has brought it up, if that is something that you all support, knowing that we need to be in school 180 days. So those 2 days are going to come from somewhere. And do we want to do that now? Do we want to wait until the spring? You tell me.
Yes.
I remember what I was thinking, it's a long stretch between January and spring break. And that possibly during the middle of that sometime, give them their stress release day, or whatever you want to call it. But I do agree, I think they work like crazy, and they do need some relief.
If given that flexibility, then yes, we can work out, 1 or 2 days that we could just kind of put in there as remote only days, and teachers and students could work remotely, asynchronously. We could easily figure it out, is my point.
Okay.
My response was simply based on trying to be true to the beliefs and supports of this board.
Right. But it looks like they, if they've, you know that if you sense that there's tension and stress.
Oh, I know.
And they're needing to, that this may need to happen. And I think you would be the person to be able to have that,
Okay.
to appreciate the time at that time, and be able to just go ahead and put that into, as a breaking point. That's the breaking point I was kind of looking at.
Absolutely.
You know that they've been tested or whatever, and they just need them, and they've been pressing hard.
And they have.
Then try to put that in. That's what I would look at.
I would suggest to go ahead, figure it out, make it happen around Thanksgiving. I have walked in those shoes of those teachers, so I know what they're going through.
Other comments, board members, about this?
I think Thanksgiving during that week is a good time. You're off on what, Wednesdays? maybe Monday, Tuesday, maybe Thursday, something like that. Superintendent, you should make recommendations, that's what we want to say.
We can always, maybe we could then just extend that first semester to be able to take care of that other problem. I don't know if that's possible, but.
Again,
Christian meeting's coming up.
oh no, we won't touch winter break.
But you would make it like a virtual day or something like that.
I mean, we can do it, we just have to, just recognizing that your days are off. If we do something around Thanksgiving, then your days are off, per semester. And do we push the semester back? Again, we can work out the logistics. If that is the pleasure of the board, we will work out logistics.
I think the superintendent should break up the district.
We can work out the logistics. And then I will send, if it's acceptable, I will send the board, what we have come up with, and if that's acceptable to everyone, then we'll implement it.
Board members, is that all right for you? Comments out?
Do we need to make a motion?
As long as this document, you gotta have permission to do that.
Yeah. I think so. You don't give any permission to, that's all. I didn't even open
That
it.
that was not.
You talked about how, they hard they work and
I'm sure the staff appreciates it.
as a teacher, I appreciate it. Okay. All right, we'll move on to correspondence. Dr. Johnson?
The correspondence, some just basic letters that you have seen that have been written. I would like to draw your attention to only two. One is the letter to which Ms. Carson referred around our recommendation. That is, it says letter to Mr. Stanley, Mr. Doug Stanley. It's on the second row, so that's that letter. Yes, that's that letter. That just captures our meeting, what was discussed, and the recommendation. And then the other thing I'd like you to take time to look at is the October newsletter. The newsletter. We send out the newsletter, and it's just another way of advertising some of the great things that staff and students do. There's engagement, there's free athletic physicals, there's just a lot of announcements that we have and a lot of things that are going on that I think sometimes people miss because they don't look at our newsletter. So, if you have a chance, just take a look.
Yeah. I'd like to, at some point in time, I knew Sidell had agreed to be chair of the committee.
Yes.
Look at the instructional school. At some point, I don't know how much we should keep in do, but I think it's important because the board has voted for that committee. And so if we do a letter or something, but at least keep him in the loop, he has to be in the loop because he got the committee together. And if the other things going on, keep him in the loop, other things, he may want to join the other committee.
We're gonna move on here. All right, we can move to recommendations.
Okay. I recommend that the board accept the personnel list as presented with the exception of adding an additional category to address our recent loss.
So moved.
Second? Second. Okay, one second. All in favor? Abstain. Okay.
B, I recommend that we bring this case back, student A or family A back to the board next month as we continue to try to get all of the information that is consistent with our regulations.
Motion?
Just JEG recommendations. JEG.
Ms. Womack? And Dr. Good, second? All in favor? Okay.
Same thing.
Yes.
And C?
There's no
There was no
recommendation.
recommendation, okay, all right. All right. I guess the last thing is that, motion to adjourn?